Welcome to the podcast for International House Quito, where we talk about important issues in language teaching and language learning. Today, we've got Alison Lasso back on the podcast. As you know, Ali is our Cambridge exam manager, and she's been very busy in the past few months because we've had a lot of exams.
Yes.
So Ali, welcome back.
Thank you
Nice to
very
have you
much.
back.
Oh, thank you, Jasper. I'm really happy to be here again.
Yeah. Well, today we're talking about pronunciation. So pronunciation is an issue that in our classes here, our learners often worry about. So today we're going to cover important aspects of pronunciation. There's a lot of dimensions to pronunciation, but we don't need to focus on all of them if we want to be a good speaker of English. And we'll talk about how to improve it. I think it's also, with pronunciation, it's important to clarify what good and realistic goals are. Okay, so Ali, you've learned English.
Yes.
What's been difficult for you about pronunciation?
Well, I think that as a Spanish speaker, there are a lot of aspects that could be hard to understand and say when you're just starting to learn English. So for me, the past tense, to pronounce the ed, to pronounce the th, or even to try to sound more natural, to sound more like a native. I think that in some way you have like a big pressure on you, like trying to not to sound that bad. And it's logical that you are not going to sound perfect when you're just starting, but in some way you have that pressure. So for me was that, to listen the past, to listen the ed, the end of each word.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was one thing, kind of hard.
Yeah, and these are all common things. I've been teaching English for 15 years, and I have heard these things. But there's good reasons for all of these things. So you mentioned, the simple past. So in English, we have this on paper, on the word, and the word, it says ed. But we might pronounce it as like absorb, absorbed, but decided. Uh-huh. And that's because English has this unique characteristic where we put a lot of stress on certain parts of a word and also certain parts of a sentence. But in Spanish, it's the stress on individual syllables is more equal.
Yeah.
So, in English, it's going to change from, in some past tense verbs, it's going to be ed, or just a t sound. Mm-hmm. And you notice, for example, imagine I'm in a restaurant and I say, I'm ordering a drink, and I say, I'd like a glass of wine. Uh-huh. You notice there's only stress on two words, glass and wine.
Yes.
If it's a noisy restaurant, I'm trying to make myself understood better. I might say, I want a glass of wine, please.
Yes. That's how I sound when I start to speak English.
There's an important point there, okay? So if we do that in English, if English is our second language, and we do say, I want a glass of wine, please, that's okay. Obviously, if somebody hears us, they will know English is not our first language. It's not going to cause any problems for communication.
Okay.
Same with the past tense verbs. If we say absorbed and decided, that's okay. Again, like somebody knows we are not a native speaker of English, but again, they can understand us perfectly.
Yes.
The only thing is, we were talking earlier about, what's the difference between beard, as in like barba, birds, pájaro, and
beer.
What was the other one? Beer, yeah. That's an important point, right? Because how many, think about Spanish. You have vowels in Spanish. How many do we have?
5.
5 vowels. A, I, U, E, O. How many do we have in English?
I have no idea.
Take a guess.
Like 20.
Not that many, thankfully. We got 12. We got 12 vowels.
Okay.
So, off the top of my head, like a, or, etc. and all the rest. So
Yes, because sometimes, sorry for interrupting
go on.
you.
No, please.
Because sometimes you change one, like A, and sometimes you say A to A, and sometimes you say like
Yes.
O, and you change it.
Exactly. So it could be, for example, that the A in car is an R sound, but it could also be, like an A sound. And that's called a diphthong. So it's kind of two vowels together.
But why?
Well, you have to go all the way back to the Anglo-Saxons.
Okay.
It's a very, it's maybe another episode.
To ask to Oxford, why? Yes, because it's complicated. For someone who doesn't speak English, it's like I have to memorize all the sounds that one vowel do in different words.
Yeah, I mean there are general rules you can apply. Remember, English. I mean, at the end, English is 65% rule based. And it's like, the other like 45%, I'm sorry, 35%, I'm bad at maths, which is a lot of exceptions. And again, that's history. It's because English has gone through a lot of changes. And when languages change, we get these irregularities in it.
Yes, I remember once in an English class, we got that conversation about what if English wasn't that complicated and we only use like a simple structure.
Yeah.
A structure? Yeah, and it was interesting because even for you, like a native speaker, it's easier sometimes to say some words in a simple way.
Yeah.
Like, for example, when you finish a sentence, instead of saying though, you only say though. Yes, right? That's one example.
Yeah, I know. I mean, obviously, when you're a native speaker, that's the challenge about learning another language. In your own language, all of this stuff is automatic. But obviously, it's kind of learning another language. It's not. It becomes something very different. But eventually, I mean, the great thing is through practice and over time, it becomes automatic, more automatic.
Yeah.
But but what about things like intonation in English? What have you thought about that?
Well, I think that I learned that once in one class. Like, it's important because sometimes you don't realize that you actually need to I don't know, to change the way that you speak. One teacher used to say, like, English is kind of like sing because you have to go like this, like going up and down. It depends on what you're trying to say, right?
So we're like it's interesting because in Ecuador, that's how a lot of people describe the accent from Cuenca.
Yes, so, they're singing. Yeah, that's right. But in English, is most of the time is like that because you have to change it, and for example, the way that you are trying, because you can say one sentence, and try to say it in a different definition or meaning.
Yeah. So a good example is, if I say, school's finished, it's a statement it's a fact. If I'm surprised, obviously the intonation changes. School's finished?
School's finished,
yeah. It's also with certain like grammar areas, like with questions. So if it's like an information question, a question with what, why, how, etc., it's always with a falling intonation. Well, most of the time. Like
how?
For example, where are you from? But if it's a yes or no question, are you from Australia?
Yes, change.
Yeah. So that's, so it can be for certain grammar areas. But the interesting thing with, and I don't know if this is similar or different in Spanish. There's a really interesting detail to pronunciation, which is communicating if something is new information or common information, something that you and I both know. So imagine everybody in International House is going to the coast for the holidays. We're all going to Mompiche. And, we're planning the holiday. And I say something like, Well, once we've arrived in Mompiche, maybe we want to spend some time in Hama. So you notice there in the first part, when I say Mompiche, there's a different intonation pattern. So the intonation's going up and down because that's something we already talked about. But I'm talking about something new. So the information is going down. So once we've arrived in Mompiche, why don't we go to Hama? The intonation goes down. So that's an interesting detail. It's something that I find really interesting in intonation.
And it's something that you don't think too much. It's just that you just say it.
Exactly. So yeah, that's what we were talking about before. Like if in our native language, all of these complex systems that we use to communicate meaning are automatic. And when we learn another language, we think, my goodness, how is this going to become automatic? There's all of these details. So that's why it's important to focus on a few.
It takes time, right?
It's just a lot of, especially with intonation. Intonation, it's going to get better as you practice, usually. That's usually what we see. The other thing, now this is something we're going to talk about in a future episode, accents.
I like that. Yes. Because I have my favorites.
So it's interesting. The main thing with accents in English, a lot of the time, it's just the vowels are a bit different. So in American English, for example, in Australian English and British English, we would atrapado, caught. But in American English, it would be something like caught.
Okay.
So it's just a different vowel.
It's super different.
Yeah.
For me, could have two different meanings. Because
especially in I think it's in the northeastern part of the US, Boston, or they pronounce it as Boston.
Boston.
Sorry, I try to avoid impersonating other accents. The other thing, obviously, is it's like in Spanish, you have that way of dividing it. Like you have ceseo, yeismo. Well, in English, there's rhotic and non-rhotic. So you notice I'm Australian. I don't say car, I say car.
Car.
And it's the same in parts of Britain. Car. But in the western part of Britain, they do pronounce the R sound. In the standard North American accent, they will say car. They will say computer.
Yes.
But not in all parts of the US. So, for example, in Boston, they're going to say car.
Really?
And same in New York as well in some cases. So as we'll talk about.
Yes, that's a big topic to talk about.
Big topic. And we're going to talk about it in a future episode. But so we've talked about all of these elements of English, like the different sounds, the fact that English just has this interesting phenomenon with stress, intonation, all of these things. But at the end of the day, what do we need? What do we need to focus on? Well, what do you think? Do you think that we need to sound like a native speaker?
Not necessary. I think as in Spanish, if someone from another country starts to speak Spanish, we are not going to think, your accent. No, it's like, you're trying to speak Spanish. Good. So no, it's not that important.
100%. No, Ali is 100% right there. We don't need to sound like a native speaker. We just need to be intelligible. In fact, sounding like a native speaker can actually cause us some problems.
Yeah.
It means that, for example, if we make a mistake, if we're in another country, so if we're in Canada or New Zealand or wherever, if we sound exactly like a native speaker, people will actually be less forgiving if we make a mistake. If we have an accent, people will be more likely to help us, actually. So that's the goal, is to just be intelligible.
Yeah.
It's not to sound like a native speaker. That's a really important point. But we need to be aware of what makes English unique, or very different from Spanish, at least. And that's connected speech that we talked about. and be aware of the different vowels. We probably want to practice improving our ability to pronounce these vowels because that can have a big difference in whether somebody might misunderstand us, for example. If we say cat instead of cut, for example. But that's about it. That's really what we need to do is we need to be aware of these, that the fact that native speakers will use these things. We don't need to worry about using all of them. And a lot of them will just improve as we practice English, like stress and intonation, for example.
I agree, definitely.
Yeah.
That's a topic for another episode, definitely. So, thank you very much. This was a really interesting topic to talk about, Jasper.
Yeah.
I like to talk about this.
Yeah, it's a great topic and an important one. It's great to have you back on.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll see more of you.
Thank you. Yes, I hope so.